Everybody has their favorite underdog, a game or even franchise that never seems to get the attention or respect that it might deserve. In the early to mid-2000s, that was doubly true. As budgets rose, the need for larger studios and more staff began running off the runts of the litter, and as publishers became far more selective about where they tossed their cash. And if you were making a platformer, you were lucky to be a needle in the bargain bin with how many games you had to compete with for space on shelves and in hearts. It's only years after the fact that some of these titles began to garner wider recognition, often thanks to good old grassroots support. Psychonauts is often hailed as one of the best games ever, and it took a good decade of word of mouth to become a successful game outside of magazine articles and forum threads. Even then, it needed one of the most successful crowdfunding campaigns in history to even sniff at a sequel. But not every success story needs to break some kind of record. Sometimes it only takes a few thousand people really dedicated to the cause. That is the story of Ty the Tasmanian Tiger, a little platforming series you've seen on shelves or recommended feeds hundreds of times, and if you're like me, they're games you've probably never touched before. Which means that you and I both missed out on some pretty solid games and ones that are surprisingly historic. Created by, at the time, one of Australia's only game dev studios, Ty not only brought to a few million kids an authentic slice of life down under, it also arguably served as the first real AAA-level title developed in Australia. An ambitious little series that jumped from collectathon to mission-based action game as industry trends began to shift, Ty always found a way to maintain its quirky, endearing cast and humor, and thanks to pure charm factor, they're far more memorable games than they really have a right to be on gameplay alone. That very same charm factor is what kept the studio pushing forward with the Tasmanian Tiger even as they struggled with tighter deadlines and weakening sales, jumping from publisher to even a third publisher, sort of, always finding a way to live on as the passion project of this studio, even if it meant taking on other projects just to keep the doors open. Hell, even the studio's 2010 closure couldn't stop the team's love for this franchise. Within just a couple years, those in charge found a way to open back up, bring back much of the old crew, and not only develop a fourth Ty game 10 years after the original game's cancellation, thanks to new release and funding strategies like Steam Early Access and smaller Kickstarter campaigns, they were able to successfully self-publish remastered and, more importantly, far improved versions of the first three games. Versions that are easy enough to pick up and play today that the series has found renewed life, leading to teases of maybe a fifth game on the horizon. With 2 decades of tumultuous history that you probably don't even know about, that's a true underdog story if I've ever seen one. This is the rise, fall, and resurgence of Ty the Tasmanian Tiger. Now, if you've watched The Golden Bolt before, this sentence will probably sound pretty familiar, and if you haven't watched before, subscribe or else YouTube beats me. The story of Ty the Tasmanian Tiger is the story of his developer, Krome Studios. Founded in 1999 in Brisbane, Australia, Krome technically got its start 6 years and 2 companies prior. See, in the early 90s, 2 guys named John Passfield and Steve Stamatiadis linked up through a mutual friend, thanks to their work as an occasional comic writer and comic artist, respectively. In the subsequent half-decade after this duo hit it off, they worked together as first a 2-man game development team, producing a handful of small computer games, some comic ideas, and more under the studio name Interactive Binary Illusions, and then later as a second company named G-Wiz Entertainment, where they brought on a few more hands to help out. It was during this latter venture, while working on Mike Stewart's Pro Bodyboarding — it was the 90s after all, every extreme sport needed some kind of tie-in game — that the two of them befriended Robert Walsh, the producer assigned to the project by the game's publisher. As soon as the game shipped, these three founded Krome Studios in an attempt to build out a larger project, a larger game studio capable of producing original AAA-level games, something that simply hadn't really been done yet in Australia. Like, don't get me wrong, there were 2 or 3 Aussie studios that predated Krome, and I pretty much genuinely mean 2 or 3. For example, Tantalus, the developers of every single port in existence. But the only large-scale, modern Australian game that came before Ty was Fallout Tactics, which actually started production right around the same time that Ty's earliest concepts were being put to paper. For these guys to put together the kind of game that they wanted to make, they would need to put together a team of dozens of employees and, more importantly, find a way to pay them, which meant finding a publisher willing to take on the risk. Surprisingly, one of the good guys in this story, actually pretty much exclusively full of good guys, is EA. I know, what a shocker, as they're the ones that dove in and happily funded a platformer by a first-time studio, a game whose thesis was, let's make the single most Australian game possible. Those aren't just my words. Throughout the studio's own 20th anniversary mini-doc covering the series, you'll hear phrases like,
you could say Thai is a little bit different from everything else in that it's very Australian, it's aggressively Australian.
A lot of other games that are made in Australia, but they're not Australian.
And
our job is to make American kids speak Australian slang. And it worked.
All spoken by the very same crew of friends that made these games 2 decades ago and then were able to get the band back together to remake them. And not only does this sort of hometown pride show up in things like the game's boomerang gameplay loop, or the locales or animal species featured in the game, like parts of the outback, or the extinct Tasmanian tiger species, or crested cockatoos, the word aggressive is the perfect one to describe just how much the dialogue hits you right in the face. Within like an hour, I went from not knowing the word struth even existed to fully understanding every possible use of it, to hearing it so often that it went back to not sounding like a word again. It's all very cute and charming, but you'd almost put money on it being this hammed-up exaggeration written and performed by Americans. And yet, when I consulted with my go-to Aussie consult Mini-Me, he immediately told me that you'll come across people in day-to-day life who talk just like this game's cast if you're down under. And clearly he speaks for the entire country, so who needs a second opinion? Now again, EA was all for this, and when the game neared its late 2002 release, the publisher planned and put out this classic edgy 2000s gaming commercial entirely on their own, where our titular hero has hospitalized Crash, Spyro, and Sonic. If you're wondering why he didn't shove a boomerang up Mario's warp pipe as well, it's probably because EA was already putting plans together with Nintendo for crossover content down the road. The thing that got EA interested in the first place was actually the boomerang itself, the visual of early prototype Ty throwing out boomerangs that looped back around too and landed right in his hand, and the game's use of those boomerangs for puzzles like lighting torches. Even in the very first proof of concept, it was enough to get the game greenlit. As a fun fact, this boomerang mechanic may be partly why Star Wars The Force Unleashed nailed its lightsaber boomerang throw. See, Krome was brought on to handle the PS2, Wii, and PSP versions of that game, the version that's now also on Switch, and when the main Xbox 360/PS3 versions team excitedly talked about their ideal implementation of a boomerang throw idea, some folks at Krome smiled and essentially said, "Yeah, we got you." Now, with a marketing pitch going right for the throats of the prior era of beloved platforming mascots, Ty had to back up the talk, and yeah, no, I'd say it did. This first game is most commonly called a Crash clone, when it's really not. I think maybe the Bandicoot Tasmanian tiger connection and the early levels of the game leaning a bit more linear built up that perception, but in reality, Ty 1 is much more directly inspired by the likes of a Banjo or Spyro. In each of the game's 9 main levels, you'll be tasked with collecting a number of these grapefruits? Called Thunder Eggs to progress through to the next world. It's, and I mean this in the absolute best way possible, put down your pitchforks, your run-of-the-mill platformer. You're gonna explore your jungles, beaches, and snowy tundras, using your 2 boomerangs as little wings to glide through the air, or throwing them at baddies that get in your way, or using a chomp homing attack to climb through floating strings of enemies, which I like to call the bite speed dash. You're welcome. The journey's gonna be the same sort of material that you've played time and again before. And yet, despite the rote gameplay and level tropes that you've forgotten a million times over, Ty has this it factor that makes me look back on my playtime fondly and nostalgically, even though I've never played the games before this video. Part of it is that these vistas might be your usual tropes at their surface level, but usually they inject this sort of virtual tourism to the outback. A jungle might seem like a normal jungle if you look at it for only a second, but as you explore it a little bit more, you'll recognize that, yeah, every one of these animals is a native to the Australian rainforest, and probably an animal that maybe you don't recognize fully or you've never even seen before. The 2 seemingly basic snow levels or the coastal water levels open up into these absolutely massive massive explorable hubs in their own right, the kind of thing that you can't help but marvel at given that this was an early PS2, GameCube, Xbox era game, a game that released a few weeks before Sly Cooper, a couple months before Ratchet & Clank, only 2 weeks after Mario Sunshine's American launch, and with more interesting water levels at that. Seeing a mountain level develop into a wide-open snowy field, a secret underwater section covered by thin ice, and a completely different logging camp over the course of just 15 to 20 minutes that this level takes you, and it all still having this sense of place and featuring unique objectives that fit each little section of the level, man, that's something special. It's hard to pull off. Sitting on a ski lift isn't traditionally what you might call fun, but the pure scale had me a little bit in awe. And then you get to the end with that classic gliding down a whole-ass mountain trailer shot that every open-world game started adopting 15 years later. Man, I was caught off guard. Now, to be clear, of course, this game didn't look quite this good when it first did it. This is the HD remaster you're seeing footage of. I'll talk more about that in a little while, but it's this sort of window-dressing stuff that somehow successfully covers for the sometimes maybe a bit sloppy fundamentals. Like, for example, this game is piss easy. By the second linear forest level or the linear final gauntlet levels, odds are you'll just decide to run past every single enemy instead of wasting time engaging because there's no reward for defeating them and because they're gonna miss you anyway, and even if they don't, 3 hits is almost always enough for you to reach the next outhouse checkpoint before you die. The story is a total non-factor, with an incredibly self-serious opening cutscene that features the orphan Ty running through the woods before stumbling into this cave where some random elder creature has been waiting for him for Ty's entire life, maybe to show him a flashback of an evil bird named Boss Cass fighting Ty's parents and the entire Tasmanian tiger species in this massive epic battle that ends with the tigers T-posing as they get sucked into a dreamland, only to be followed by Ty, the kid who again has been an orphan as long as he can remember, kinda just smiling and saying "you rippa" a bunch and functioning completely oblivious to everything going on as he collects the 5 talismans needed to bring back his family. He's kind of just a little idiot doing his own thing with his weird little side mouth thing. Seriously, his mouth pretty much only exists on one or the other side, and sometimes maybe even both sides of his face, but never the front unless he's chomping, but he has teeth and whole lips on the side. It's kind of like the opposite of Sonic's weird conjoined eye. He just has 3 mouths or something, and whatever, I'm fine with it because the game plays into all of this. The characters all kind of realize that this Wallace and Gromit looking ass is maybe a little bit dense, so it better helps explain the game doing that thing that all lower budget platformers did at the time, where it chooses to stop you constantly during the tutorial levels just to tell you the mechanics instead of, showing you and letting you figure it out yourself. It makes sense because Ty's kind of simple. And again, all while this lovable doofus is doing his own thing, helping his buddies out because it's the right thing to do, and along the way, happening to stumble into saving the world, the villain Boss Cass is in the background running through this melodramatic, serious world domination plan featuring Ty's long-lost brother Sly, who may as well be this game's Shadow the Hedgehog, only for Sly to turn face after one single boss fight in a random level out of nowhere, and a cutscene later on where he essentially gets beaten in a single Matrix dodge after being built up as this super powerful foe. It's so stupid. I love it so much. This sort of tonal clash just wouldn't work if the team at Krome didn't lean perfectly into it. It's the little things like this, or the absolute bop that is this game's soundtrack, that take this game from a normal but maybe forgettable platformer into a game and really a franchise that stands far taller than it really rightfully should. Just for reference on how run-of-the-mill this core gameplay should be, there are 8 grapefruits per level, 3 levels per world, and when you collect enough of them, you'll gain access to that world's boss, which in turn opens up the next world and gives you a spiffy new boomerang type to play with and some new mechanics that come along with each of those. Some of these grapefruits will be locked behind different missions, often your usual platformer fodder like a race or a turret section, or maybe a little story beat dealing with one of this game's small but impressively memorable cast. You'll also be able to collect 300 opals per level, this game's version of notes or gems, and 5 bilbies that you have to rescue from precarious spots, just unabashedly this game's Jinjo, and each of these missions will also reward you with a grapefruit upon completion. If you're wondering what bilbies are, by the way, unlike Jinjos, they're actually real. They're a species of little marsupials also often called rabbit-eared bandicoots, and they're of course native to Oceania. Now, with 8 Power Star equivalents per level, some cute little animals to save along the way, some shiny gems to grab, this is all as cookie cutter as it comes, right? And it's not even like all of the Thunder Eggs will have their own unique missions either. Many of the grapefruits will just be spread around the level like your usual Power Star kind of collectible, which is interesting because this game also has a completely different kind of collectible that's also found at the end of little platforming challenges or puzzles or what have you, just like a Power Star would be. That is kind of redundant, don't you think? These second sort of Power Stars are golden cogs, no relation, and they're your upgrade collectible of sorts. While reaching each new world of the game unlocks you some new boomerang types like a flame rang that can burn away obstacles like spider webs, the frosty rang, which is actually super rad because it lets you create infinite ice platforms on water like the N64 Zelda ice arrows, or the aqua rang, which incidentally gives you a really fun to control swimming ability that itself also kind of feels like Zora Link. These guys, they were definitely Zelda fans. I love it. On top of these, there are also a half dozen special rangs that you can buy for 15 cogs each, and for the record, I did not use the word rang there as my own slang. That is something the game does itself. Just want to throw that out there. There are 10 of these cogs per level for you to find, usually in similar places to where you'd expect to find half of those grapefruits, which again, kinda weird. Some of these new boomerangs are as simple as letting you throw more than 2 boomerangs out at once so you're not waiting as long between throws, or an exploding ka-boomerang, their words not mine, or one that can lock onto and homing attack multiple targets at once, or one that lets you see invisible objects, such as the bonus concept art pictures that are hidden all throughout the game, usually in invisible floating crates. With 250 of these pictures in the game, on top of over 300 regular collectibles per level, and on top of the 25 overworld collectibles that you can find to double your health bar, whew boy, I mean, everybody points to DK64 as the collectathon to end all collectathons with the most collectibles possible, but Tai has about 3,200 when you add everything up, only 600 behind Donkey Kong, despite the game being easily, at best, half the length. It is so much at points that the collecting just kind of feels obligatory, and your completion reward for doing everything is actually just 2 more empty bonus levels where you just collect even more things. To supersaturate that much stuff into a game that really only takes 6 to 7 hours to beat, and to be able to do that in a game that really only has one main gameplay gimmick going for it, it's impressive that this game even lands at all. Like, there are some core mechanics in this game that I just do not like. They may have nailed the boomerang stuff and found consistently unique ways to iterate on those, but I actually hate how this game handles the camera when Tai jumps. There are 2 different options on the camera tracking during jumps, and both essentially wait until the middle of Tai's jump arc to suddenly jerk upward to follow him, which is both disorienting in the moment and also makes it hard to see where you're going to land because then it has to jerk downward to show you where you are in the air. Even better, Tai's double jump has a very precise window at its very apex where you'll actually gain a tiny smidge of air as part of the glide animation. At first, I didn't even realize that there was a difference. If it weren't that way across the entire series, you would think it might be an oversight, but no, they built it so that if you're not absolutely perfect, there are a good number of basic collectibles that are only a pixel out of reach that you'll think is the game's fault rather than yours until you realize. Usually if you have a high jump or a glide or a double or triple jump, you make the gaps between platforms progressively larger so the player knows which jumps to use. In this case, it's the same jump, you just gotta be marginally more perfect with it, and I don't know, in my opinion, not really great design. Tai is just a fascinating game. It straddles the line between being reductive and somehow innovative. It runs into basic control issues and overloads on collectibles, but does its one calling card so well that it turns simple level designs novel again, making for a game that's most fun to beat rather than complete. It'll randomly toss one-off power-ups that only get used maybe 1 or 2 times throughout the entire game and don't really even have a reason to exist, and then in the same breath put together simple but really enjoyable boss fights that take more than just the bare minimum of thought. The pacing sort of collapses near the end because the 4th world of the game got knocked out of scope early on, and so instead of just knocking down the amount of talismans needed to save Tai's family to 4, they give you the 4th of the 5 talismans just randomly in the middle of the last 2 levels after fighting Rouge the Bat, but she's actually named Shadow. She shows up out of nowhere with, as far as I can recall, 0 foreshadowing and fights you before never being seen again in the entire rest of the series. And then after that weird cutscene where they just skip any sort of second boss fight between Tai and Sly, despite, foreshadowing that would be a thing. They throw you into a final boss fight where you're just supposed to know to freeze these turrets and then chomp on them, culminating in a multiple minute long steerable boomerang throw down a giant robot's exhaust shaft that you will genuinely think you are doing wrong due to how long it takes you to do, with zero feedback to tell you that the game's not bugging out or something. This boomerang, by the way, is given to Tai at the climax of the game by his long-lost brother Sly after a dramatic turn to the good side, and all Tai has to say is one of the same 4 catchphrases he always repeats, with no concept of fitting the moment. It's almost as if Tai was meant to be a silent protagonist for most of production, and then when they decided he would be voiced, they just shoved his catchphrases wherever they could. Oh, and also to bookend the T-posing at the start of the game, when the Tasmanian tigers are saved from their banishment, they show back up with a low-quality, stock popping sound effect. I couldn't help but laugh throughout the entire last hour of the game, and that's absolutely part of the point, don't get me wrong. Again, it's impressive that the game finds a way to pull off so much tonal whiplash, and it's why, even though by every conceivable metric this game should be average, it punches above its weight class a little bit. And that was true for the game's performance as well. There's a reason that Tai was able to land a sequel. Despite the very stiff competition within the genre, Tai still sold over 1 million copies, and sales were essentially consistent every single month for the first year it was on the market. It reviewed relatively favorably, although many of my criticisms of this game did end up referenced in reviews at the time, and even regular folks like you or I that played the game back then recall feeling a bit disappointed when they were kids that the game was so easy and over so quickly. To some extent, I kind of feel the same way. I'm not super satisfied with that last ending stretch of the game, and I would have loved to see, in the ideal world of course, the 4th world of this game fully fleshed out, because I think there was more for that game to give. So the goal with the second outing was, at first, to address these issues, but still expand upon the things the game nailed: the core gameplay, the characters, the tone of the game, find a way to add even more boomerangs because that was the big winner with players. However, 9 months into production, EA peeked its head in the door and suggested, hey, actually, maybe don't make the exact same kind of game again, the kind we already approved, try something new. If you want to feel some tonal whiplash, where Tai 1 was loosely called a Crash game but again was more accurately a Banjo or a Spyro, 2 is an open-world, mission-based adventure game. The closest comparison would be to a Grand Theft Auto, or more accurately a Jak 2 or a Jak 3. More so Jak 2, because both have a pseudo-open world that's actually just a bunch of linear roads that loosely connect, featuring hilariously bad driving controls. In this game's case, you're not driving through cities, but rather empty outback highways before you reach Tai 1-styled level areas that you enter after wading through a Jak or Metroid-styled load-masking door or elevator. Oh, and also, apropos of nothing here, there are dinosaurs in one level, not because there are dinosaurs in Australia, but because the team repurposed as much of the finished work as they could from the original version of Tai 2, which was going to have some sort of time travel-based story. I didn't think there was a way for a game to have a more jarring jump from the first to the second than Jak did, but oh my god. And the worst part? They did it again. The whiplash somehow works, even though it should, for all intents and purposes, be a worse game. I think Tai 2 is better than the first one, and for the first time on this channel, I don't really know if I can explain why. Tai the Tasmanian Tiger 2 Bush Rescue released in October 2004, almost exactly 2 years after the first game, and it opens with one of the most absolutely batshit opening sequences I think I've ever experienced in a game, featuring this full-on assault between Tai and friends and Boss Cass's lizard army. You're punching stuff in a mech suit, there's a turret section where you're taking down even bigger skyscraper-sized mech suits and dropships, the voiceover mixing is constantly going from a little bit too quiet to peaking like it's a kid eating his mic on Xbox 360 game chat. All of this comes so far out of left field that somebody has to have thrown it so hard to the right that it circled the fucking globe. This intro sequence ends with a boss fight against a new character that thankfully will come back more than once, unlike the Rouge the Bat named Shadow from the first game. That was still kinda weird. And after that fight, our bird villain Boss Cass finds a way to escape from prison and founds his own country off the Australian coast so that he can have diplomatic immunity. You know what? No, I lied. I can absolutely explain why this game is better than 1, and it's those last 25 to 30 words of that sentence there. The whiplash doesn't quite end there, though. In fact, it only gets more whiplashy from here. So the vast majority of this game is filler, as Ty and friends help do odd jobs throughout the community as part of the newly founded Bush Rescue Rangers Squad, all while waiting for a chance to legally go after Boss Cass. Some of these missions include flying a helicopter in top-down missions not too far off from Sly Cooper's RC Chopper missions, some arena challenges that are pathetically easy, kart racing that somehow controls far better than the overworld driving, timed fetch quests that take you from one of the hub areas into the overworld and then across the map to another hub area, and every now and then taking you to a level that actually resembles something you'd expect from the game after playing Ty 1. Some of these proper levels are absolutely stellar. Like, there are a few of the levels with some branching pathways that really hit that good brain zone, letting you backtrack or loop around to find all of the countless hidden collectibles, complete the different missions on each path, or find a random cave with a grind rail mission where it's hard to see what you're doing because the sparks from grinding cover up Ty's character model. That part maybe isn't that stellar, but at least it's neat. At different points throughout the game after you've completed a few missions, you might get an update that lets you go fight a boss and do something of actual substance, but there genuinely may as well not be an overall plot beyond what I've already said. And honestly, let's be real, diplomatic immunity is a good enough plot for me. For example, near the end of Chapter or Act 2 of this game, there's a level with a firefighting mech. These mechs are called bunyips, by the way. That'll be important later, so make sure you remember it for the test. And you fight your way up this massive oil rig that's been attacked by Boss Cass's forces. You're clearing smoke and fire as you ascend, and the level around you continues to get smokier and harder to see. Now, admittedly, that level may start to overstay its welcome a tiny bit by the end. Sure, there are only so many times you can squirt out some water and hit the same 2 switches in a row before it starts to feel like padding, and that's kind of a problem this whole game has despite being shorter than 1, but this section is one of the most memorable moments of the game for me. One of the problems with Ty 2's structure is that the levels that are in the first game style, they don't exactly loop because they wouldn't have needed to. Unlike in the first game, where each level was something you teleported into and out of from the overworld, this world being interconnected means that linear levels should have some proper exit back to where you started. There really aren't, though. It's weird that there aren't even like teleporters at the end that take you back to the start of that level area, which is something that Ty 1 did actually do for some of its missions, despite having a linear teleport in and out style level structure. Instead, every time you finish a mission in Ty 2, you've got to slowly backtrack throughout the entire level to get back to your car. Once you're out by the car, though, and in the proper overworld, the pause menu has an exit level option that lets you go right back to your base in the town of Burramudgee. So, like, why not have that available at any time you're not actively completing a mission? Oh, also, even that teleport, it brings you all the way back to the ranger base at the very corner of the base town, which is a good minute or so of slow jogging away from the town itself, which is itself another slow minute of jogging away from taking you to the car out in the overworld. So there's a lot of weird, almost padding in this game. And I get it, this game would be significantly shorter than its 6 or so hour runtime if they let you skip some of this overworld padding stuff, but it's not like driving around the empty roads, throwing the occasional boomerang at a motorcycle lizard, and riding through really loud mud that makes uncomfortable grapefruit noises is peak gameplay. Even just a sprint button would be a welcome addition here. Like, I actually really like the layout of this little Burramudgee town. It's cool seeing the different townsfolk walking around and existing in the world. Sometimes they have unique dialogue besides just, "Hey Ty," depending on where you are in the story. It's the kind of world building that the Ty games perfectly nail. Just about all of the characters from the first game return here in some capacity, and several new ones enter the fray too. I didn't talk in detail about many of the characters when talking about 1 because they're just kind of charming. They don't necessarily have a great memorable line or joke or anything of note to say. It's in Ty 2 where you really get to see many of them for more than a mission or 2 each, despite the game being shorter than 1. Dennis, for example, is this wimpy little frog guy that mostly brags about how much money he has in the first game, but by this one he's become the rich, out-of-touch mayor of the town with an even wimpier nephew. He bakes these weird meatless meat pies for some of the townsfolk, which they find kind of funky because they expect there to be meat in a meat pie. Essentially, he's kind of one of those obnoxious vegan characters years before the obnoxious vegan trope became a more popular thing, let alone in kids' media. He's just the right kind of annoying that when he returned in later games after this, I kind of looked forward to seeing him. There are so many characters like him or Julius the Koala that appear throughout the game, and there are just as many that only appear for a couple small lines, just regular folks living their lives otherwise. It's a testament to the little world that Krome created and the strong character design that they're able to fill a town with at least 2 or 3 dozen different characters that show up across a string of kids games that only runs maybe 30 total hours, that they could build this charming ensemble in an almost Simpsons-esque way when contemporary games like a Ratchet, a Jack, a Sly, even Mario may as well only have 5 or 6 characters and then a bunch of one-and-dones. It's actually part of why I think Tai 2 kinda works. Sure, most of the game's 44 missions are worthless little ticky-tack things that would likely annoy you in many other games, but here it's just kind of you being a good dude and helping out your neighbors.
The only thing we're lacking now is a large supply of unsuspecting mammals.
Don't worry about that, Carlos. I know exactly where we can find some.
While I'm on the subject of the town, it's here that you can buy different equipment for Tai, like the ability to use some of those bunyip mechs, which is kind of an odd way to wall off some level progression because these are needed for some missions, and having to buy them in some random store in the middle of a town that they don't really go out of their way to highlight is a place where you would want to go to buy things that are necessary for story progression. Kinda weird, but hey. There are also even more boomerang types, such as 2 different types of swing shot boomerang that allow for some neat backtracking stuff later, and if you go to your brother Sly's treehouse on another part of the map, you can pay him for even stronger, upgraded versions of those rangs. Plus, you get to talk to Sly, who's kind of just suddenly a goober instead of an edgy anti-hero. They really accelerated his Shadow the Hedgehog character arc. Also, I'm sorry, I need to point this out because my brain is poisoned. Every single time I went back to this main hub town and the 8-minute long looping track started playing from the beginning, and this happens multiple times every hour of the game because you go back here constantly, the opening riff sounds so uncannily like it's about to break into the Better Call Saul theme, and every time I thought I was being pranked. Now, one of the things the team at Krome did to try and cover for this weird decision to force backtracking, at least in some of the levels, certainly not all of them, was place some token collectibles throughout the levels in such a way that you'd probably only catch them on your way back. Just like with a game like Jak 2, collecting isn't even close to the name of the game like with their predecessors. Opals are now just an unlimited currency, and fighting enemies actually has a purpose now since they reward you with money upon defeat, and again, you kinda need money to progress. That, alongside a stronger enemy variety, gives you some more places to use the boomerangs, which were kind of just a cool novelty in the first game that you didn't really have a ton of use for when you could just run past the enemies. And since those are the closest thing these games have to a key feature or selling point, I actually think that might be another part of why I enjoy this game a little bit more than one. Even with fewer great, well-designed levels and more random fillery missions, the simple combat loop means that it sort of ends up being more memorable. That simple combat loop, another thing you should probably hang on to for just a little bit, we'll come back to it. Plus, outside of a couple really weird bosses using those bunyip mechs, the boss fights are usually super fun, even more so than the first games. They even have a fight reminiscent of Wart from Majora's Mask, that one eye mini-boss with the 100 bubbles moving around him that congeal into different shapes and whatnot. Again, these guys had to be Zelda fans, and I am here for it. As far as other collectibles go, the golden cogs have been replaced by platinum cogs, which some folks seem to insist was a fun poke at Ratchet & Clank going from gold bolts to platinum bolts, though I couldn't find any developer info that outright confirmed that. And instead of the grapefruits, there's now a collectible that's just the studio's logo. And there are still a ton of invisible boxes with concept art and stuff. Cool, whatever. The new chromium orbs are the only one of these that really has an actual function, as they serve as a special currency that lets you buy map upgrades that'll show you the location of the returning Bilby Jinjo things, the platinum cogs, or one other collectible that I'll talk about in a sec. Funnily though, there's no map you can buy that lets you find the chromium orbs that you would need to buy these other maps. The platinum cogs, at least in the original game, genuinely did nothing. They just rewarded you with some money, I'm assuming because their placements were already mapped out in some of the original Tai 2 levels, and they just didn't have a good reward to give once they changed the function of the game. At the very least, they fixed this in the HD version of Tai 2, where they let you buy some new skins for Tai or his girlfriend's Jeep. And last, but maybe also kind of least as far as collectibles go, is some drunk guy named Goobu Steve. You kinda just find him randomly throughout different parts of the game, and he tells you this nonsensical story before giving you money for listening to him.
They won't find me. No way. I think they might be attracted to orange rat smells. Listen, if I give you these, will you go away?
I kind of feel like at some point he's going to tell me not to tell anybody or I'll get in trouble too. I don't know how I feel about that. He does tease the eventual story of Tai 3 though, so that's something, I guess. All in all, most of Tai 2 is just kind of a comfort food game. It's less exciting to complete than one would be, and yet I found myself doing far more of it. Actually, I got the 90% completion in about 6 hours. The game's very short, and that might help these short missions feel less like padding and more like part of a lower-key adventure. Honestly, that somehow benefits the tonal whiplash between the super serious villain plot and the mostly oblivious hero objectives for most of the adventure before they finally go on a collision course. Like, Boss Cass is out here swapping warm-blooded mammal blood into his lizard army to make them super powerful mutants. He's planting secret lizard people among society that you can only weed out with a special X-ray boomerang to see through their costumes. Dude wants to wipe out all warm-blooded life because he's jealous of mammals running the world and he wants to bring back his dinosaur ancestors. And then Ty's out here using a helicopter to put together pieces of a highway and doing construction or throwing crocodiles back into their habitat or something. It's so stupid. I love it. Between the unnecessary, kind of linear vehicle-based overworld and the mission structure changing to fit wider gaming trends, the massive tone shift, all of it, I'd call it a poor man's Jak 2, but honestly, Jak 2 is a poor man's Jak 2, fight me. Instead, this almost apes that formula and makes it for even younger children, not unlike Naughty Dog aping GTA 3's formula and making it for marginally older kids in that 12 to 13 kind of range. I would recommend the first Tai game to fans of the collectathon genre because it's a genuinely fun little platformer that only lasts a good 7 to 8 hours. It's charming, you'll enjoy the characters and the cozy vibe. I recommend Tai 2 for anybody interested enough after Tai 1 because it fills a weird niche in my brain that I didn't quite know existed, and because even if you don't love the weird fillery quest structure, the boomerang combat brings just enough to the table to make it worth a few hours of your time. But do I recommend Tai 3?
No!
Or at least not yet. See, this is the only game in the series that hasn't had a full rework for modern consoles. Even Tai 4 is getting a Switch remaster before 3 does. That's because based on some comments from folks at Krome, it sounds like if they're ever gonna do more than the quick tweaks of 3's PC remaster, they would want to change a lot of this game, and that's simply gonna be too cost prohibitive. But we'll talk about the remaster stuff later. First, we've got to look at 3 proper. Now, stop me if you've ever heard this story before. The third game in this mid-2000s platformer trilogy was made in less than a year on a very crunched production cycle. If somehow that doesn't sound familiar, you've either never watched one of my videos before, and if you're this far in, hopefully you've decided to subscribe by now. Please God, YouTube is standing behind me, and they look angry, and or you've completely missed the years 2004 and 2005. From Sly to Tai, Jack to Tack, Ratchet to... I don't have a third rhyme. Every single one crunched out a third game by 2005 so that they were ready for the coming launch of the next generation of consoles. Or in the case of Naughty Dog and Insomniac, they released their trilogy cap-offs in 2004 just so they had time to toss out a fourth game in 2005, which was also made on a flamin' hot crunchy schedule. Yeah, it's lunchtime. Why do you ask? Tai, however, had a unique bonus wrinkle on top of only having about 10 months to go from idea to gold master. EA had decided not to pursue a third game, presumably due to sales of Tai 2 falling below even half of the first game's moderate at best success. Krome still felt the Little Ripper had some life in him though, and the studio was able to sign a publishing arrangement with Activision. As far as that relates to Tai, this partnership doesn't mean much beyond getting another game, but I have a little theory about what it did mean for the studio. See, this publishing agreement would have been inked anywhere from late 2004 when Tai 2 was wrapping to early 2005 as production was beginning on the third game. Krome Studios also began working in 2005 on another Activision-published platformer, The Legend of Spyro, the first full reboot of the Spyro franchise. Now, whether Tai was tossed in as a rider onto the Spyro plans or not, I can't really say, but I would be surprised if these two aren't related in some way. If you think it's a little strange that the studio was developing 2 platformers for different franchises at the same time for the same publisher but still having to crunch on a tight deadline for at least one of them, and it sounds like both, honestly, well, you're starting to see the issue here. By this point, Krome had steadily grown into the largest game developer in the country, in part because of the upper brass's willingness to lean into the disappointing fact of Aussie game development at the time. It was cheap labor. American publishers could outsource licensed budget titles down under, and since there wasn't really a significant amount of work coming in, nor were there many studios to work at to begin with, you took what you could, both as a company and as an individual employee. That meant tight deadlines, low budgets, and work that perhaps wasn't the most creatively fulfilling, to be the kindest that I can here. Just to jump ahead a bit, after TIE 3's 2005 release, Krome developed 2 of the Legend of Spyro trilogy back-to-back in 2006 and 2007, both on a shoestring budget, along with the Viva Pinata party game spin-off. In 2008, they developed both the last-gen version of Star Wars The Force Unleashed and a completely separate Star Wars fighting game for the Wii, as well as a Hellboy tie-in game and one of the Seen It movie trivia games. That's 4 games in 6 months. From there, they continued making a couple tie-in games in 2009 and 2010, started taking on some Windows Phone projects bankrolled by Microsoft trying to make the Windows Phone a thing, good luck with that, and then in 2010, they closed down because as the Great Recession progressed worldwide, publishers had less incentive to outsource to Australia. By this point, some projects were already being developed remotely from different teams around the world. The PS2 was dead and buried, and licensed Wii tie-ins were starting to lighten up in terms of both release frequency, and the wheels simply started to fall off once a few of Krome's projects were cancelled. Not to mention the fact that some of the Australian state governments and the federal Australian government dragged their feet in considering tax incentives for games developed in the country. Those incentives only took effect in spring 2022, even though Krome and other studios at the forefront of the Australian games industry had been pushing for it for at least 15 years when the film and television tax credits were revamped back in 2007. It's easy for publishers to go somewhere else for their game development needs when they get cash back for doing so. Anyway, this is all to say that even the biggest Australian developer in the mid-2000s was often treated as not much more than a shovelware or port factory. Perhaps that's part of why Krome hung on so firmly to TIE, because like one of the developers said, it was one of the only Australian projects that was truly Australian, not just in terms of content or humor or setting, but in terms of soul. Maybe pushing through tons of tight-pursed, licensed tie-ins didn't beat the creativity out of the studio because they always had an actual passion project they could be proud of, that they could continue to work on, even if that too had to deal with crunchy production times. Sadly, as inspiring as that sort of message may be, TIE 3 is not a good game, and those at Krome Studios, they kind of admit that. TIE the Tasmanian Tiger 3 Night of the Quinkin dropped in October 2005, and like many of the mid-2000s platformers, it was finally time to get a little bit edgy. After defeating Boss Cass yet again at the end of the second game, TIE is contacted by the Elder that he met at the start of the first game. This Elder tells him of this evil species of Heartless. They're just kind of the Heartless from Kingdom Hearts. And according to the Elder, these creatures, known as the Quinkin, had invaded the sacred realm called the Dreaming, right at the exact same time that the second game had started. And just in case you thought that having half the development time or budget wouldn't show in TIE 3, that's kind of just the opening there. TIE and his girlfriend Shazza just turn around and walk into the portal, no sound effect or anything, just end cutscene. After doing some of your usual tutorial level stuff, TIE obtains this special gauntlet that allows him to damage the Heartless. He meets 2 more of the ancient Bunyip Elders, 2 named characters that are featured here, and then never again. TIE goes on an extended training montage that involves exclusively doing push-ups to the admittedly catchy main series theme, and then TIE gets separated from Shazza in the portal back to home, and comes to 6 months later. TIE immediately meets a new Tasmanian tiger named Ridge, who is also pretty much only featured in this cutscene before being relegated to being a random guard. He's just here for this. and nothing else. He's not even in the ending of the game. So anyway, for reasons not quite explained, Tai was stuck in that portal for 6 months, but came out of it in the exact same spot where he would have landed anyway, which is also where I think Shazza did land, so how did he get stuck there for 6 months if they were in the... whatever. Anyway, in the 6 months that he's been gone, the lizard army from prior games has now become a zombie lizard army, and along with the Heartless, they've waged war on the living, or whatever. The old town of Burramudgee from Tai 2 was destroyed in the first part of this war, leading the survivors to found a new town elsewhere on more or less the same map from Tai 2. The wimpy, kind of stupid comic relief character Dennis is now a legendary military general because, of course he is.
Oh, don't worry about little old me, Tai. I never go for a stroll without my bazooka!
Between General Knuckles here and the whole protagonist was gone 6 months and a massive war broke out, this game kind of predicted Sonic Forces 12 years early.
None of this is good, Vector. That's why it's called war.
If this feels like an all-over-the-place, random, messy retelling, I promise you I am doing this justice. This all happens in the first 14 minutes of the game. The rest of the story from here is more or less the same sort of kind of fillery missions that Tai 2 had, except here, it's more often meant to recruit old friends back into the fight and then you never see them again, or it's meant for you to deal with annoying kids in kart races, but this time as part of the mandatory progression rather than as a fun side gimmick like they were in 2. I wish I was kidding or exaggerating here. Even the very first mission of this game is a kart race to win back an old ally's trust. Where Tai 2 had 44 missions and only a handful of them were truly required for progression, the third game only has 29 missions. Most of them are forced on you, and the variety, or frankly quality, just is not there. The second mission is an arena fight, the third is a slow escort mission, and to top it all off, the open world car exploration from 2 has been replaced with open world crab exploration. There are at least more enemies and things to do now than there were in the finished version of Tai 2's overworld, but A, that's not saying much, it's mostly just random bad crab platforming, and I would be lying to you if I said I expected crab platforming in a game about the Australian outback. Then again, I'd also be lying if I said I expected this game about the Australian outback to make the main enemies zombies and Kingdom Hearts creatures. But all jokes aside, at least the latter kind of actually makes sense. See, the Quinkin are based on ancient indigenous Australian paintings and mythos, depicting the same sort of spirits from which this game's creatures are inspired, and honestly, I wouldn't be shocked if the Heartless share a similar cultural inspiration. I don't play Kingdom Hearts, and I couldn't find anything in my research to fully indicate that, so, I don't know, you weird Kingdom Hearts fans tell me, I guess. Whatever their inspiration may be, because regular attacks can't damage the Quinkin, Tai 3 moves further away from the boomerang gameplay and uses that new gauntlet to give Tai some pretty subpar beat-em-up combat options. You can still use the boomerangs on the zombie lizard armies and whatnot, but you need to get close enough to these new baddies that you're probably going to take damage while hitting them, and even better, in the original version of Tai 3, these enemies took forever to kill because the team never quite got the combat balance nailed down. In the game's HD remaster for PC, they pretty much just upped the damage scaling for Tai to account for this, so sometimes things just die instantly, and honestly I would rather it be this way than mashing the button over and over and over again like it seems like you did back on the GameCube or PS2 or Xbox. I really don't want to spend too much time on Tai 3 because I just have very little even decent to say about it. Like, the absolute best compliment I can give this game is that I genuinely do enjoy seeing this cast of characters hang out and interact. The humor is usually solid, and even with a ton of new and old characters shoved into the light for a single scene never to be even referenced again, they at least usually find a way to be interesting for the 5 seconds they're here. Partway through the game, for example, you get to visit Boss Cass's sovereign state that he founds for diplomatic immunity back in 2. I still love that plot point, and there are a few pretty cool things here. Rouge the Bat's daughter is here for some reason. Didn't know she had a daughter, but apparently she did, and she just kind of says, yeah, sorry about my mom trying to kill you. That's great. Cool, I guess. Sai the Cybernetic Tiger, the Metal Sonic of the Tai series, no, I am not joking, is just standing around as a continued running gag. See, he was meant to be the villain of the original version of Tai 2 back when it was a direct mechanical follow-up to Tai 1, but when the game changed to the version we ended up getting, he got written out into being just a cameo character that the team liked referencing constantly as a joke, and you know what? I kind of like that too. And my favorite thing about this area, when you first talk to Boss Cass to try and team up with him, he says,
I, for one, welcome our new Quinken overlords.
Which is just stellar. Every time this guy opens his mouth, it is a treat. Even with a Swiss cheese script thanks to what I have to assume are tons of cuts, it's a funny and charming little game. But funny and charming doesn't hold things together this time. The boss fights are a disappointing step down from 1 and 2, ranging from this mediocre fight against a weird six-legged crab thing that has pretty much no design at all, to a Star Fox all-range dogfight against a dragon whose model is so bad that I think it was made in a blender, not like the 3D sculpting software, I mean an actual blender. A good 15% of the missions take place in this same Star Fox flight style, which would be neat in terms of scale, but it doesn't at all lend itself to engaging gameplay since 2 of the missions are identical, one of them is an escort mission, one's that bad boss fight, and your x-axis is locked a la Ratchet & Clank A Crack in Time, so you're not really doing much flying to begin with. Actually, I was gonna avoid digging into the mission variety too hard, but screw it. No more than a dozen of the 29 missions in this game are what I would call regular TIE gameplay, a few of those also being escort missions. A couple of them are just backtracking, one's that other bad boss fight. A few of the remaining missions after that are ones that put you in the bunyip mech suits, which can sometimes be an extension of the TIE gameplay, but not really here as much as they were in 2. The same amount of missions are arena fights, which may as well be 2 minutes long at best, and unless I've counted wrong, and I double-checked guides to make sure I didn't, a quarter of this game's missions are kart races. Or I'm sorry, some of them are kart destruction derbies, where you have to destroy the other racers within a time limit while driving on the same regular kart tracks you were driving on for the race missions, rather than dedicated kart arena levels. This game may as well be a rubber room, because even the padding has padding. Mixing up the gameplay styles can be fine in these sorts of platformers, so long as you're not straying too far from the core of what players were enjoying. Space combat makes sense as a deviation in a game about a space rat and tin can flying through the galaxy. The rest of the Cooper gang have their own wrinkles, but still function in the same stealth platforming kind of way. The absolute last thing I'd think of when thinking of Boomerang Boy here is driving a go-kart. Even in the third or so of this game, when you're doing regular TIE gameplay, hopefully the stuff that you're coming here for, there are really no more than 3 or 4 actual levels of substance that you get to explore or do anything with, and most of the time your gameplay is that bland beat-em-up combat, since the boomerangs took a back seat, and that's a shame because they tried something new and neat with the boomerang gameplay, giving you these customizable gem slots that allow you to change and combine the properties of your boomerangs instead of just giving you 20 different ones. It'd be really cool to see that used more than it is in this game, but it's just an afterthought. And it only gets better. Near the end of the game, you find out from that drunk Goobu Steve guy that he's actually the local Quinken expert scholar, because of course he is, and so you grab these special stones to make a super powerful shadow boomerang to fight the unkillable Quinken king, and the game almost doesn't do the, oh whoops, you dropped the MacGuffin, now you gotta go do a string of fetch quests to get them all over again, but then it still does it anyway, even hiding one of them behind the kart races. There is no trope that I hate more than the stupid, oh, you gotta go get the things you already got again because we're padding the game out. That is the one for me, so that was the point of no return for this game. Apparently, it was even worse in the original version, because the AI rubber banding during these later kart races meant that you were likely to pull your hair out losing again and again and again and again and again before you finally got lucky enough to escape with a win. The overworld crab car thing is probably the most, hey, you should probably improve this. Wait, no, not like that type of change that I can recall experiencing in a sequel in a long time. Like when you jump, if you're just going at full speed, you just ragdoll instantly, so you've got to slow down a bit to jump in this thing, or just lean into damage boosting by jumping directly onto bombs. I don't understand why it's a thing. Even by the end of the game, there's a huge your squad teams up to fend off the enemies section, only for them to be taken out before they can actually help fend off the enemies, only for them to show right back up at the end anyway, so why even do the double fake out? The game goes as far as trying to sacrifice a major-ish character in this emotional climax moment of the game, but it also just doesn't work when they and the other characters besides Ty were tied up during one frame of this cutscene, and then during the next their arms are all untied, meaning that they just watched somebody jump in front of a missile instead of walking over 1 foot to Boss Cass next to him and arresting him before he tries to blow Ty up. Also, when they just don't have any resolution whatsoever. The game simply cuts to a voiceless ending scene without wrapping any of the story up, just showing a statue erected for the sacrificed character, and nothing else. It's just, if it were even another step further in this direction, I would be laughing at it because it would clearly be parody, but even the first two games having their tongue firmly stuck inside their cheek, it didn't lead to this. They still showed some respect towards the audience and their intelligence. Tie 3 is just so far removed from both the platforming that made 1 enjoyable and the casual help your friends vibe that got 2's weird fillery missions to work against all odds. Having casual missions doesn't quite work when there's a full-on war going on around you against, I might remind you, the undead, and while it's super funny to see Ty acting all oblivious again even in this setting, man, it's just a swing and a miss overall. Thankfully, the game's only a 5 to 6 hour journey, even shorter than 2 before it, but where with 2 I can say I had fun with most of that runtime, I really don't think I was interested in any of this third game outside of a morbid curiosity what random stuff or what new one-and-done character they would throw at the wall in the next cutscene. I'd also like to say that this was the point at which I realized that Ty's name is actually always fully capitalized, but no one else in his family has a fully capitalized name. Like, are we supposed to shout his name? Or, like, why is he Ty, but we don't shout Sly's name? Does he think we're angry at him all the time? Poor guy. Maybe the worst part about all of this was that plans were already in motion to bounce off the weak flying ship combat featured in this third game to make a fourth game titled Ty 4 Gunyip. A good 6 months of work, more than half of the total development time of Ty 3, went into this idea in 2005 and early 2006 before the game was cancelled, probably due to 3 just completely bombing sales-wise, and honestly it's probably for the best that we didn't get an aerial dogfighting spin-off as the 4th entry, because with these sorts of deadlines, I just don't think it would have even had a chance at being good. Instead, what we got as Ty 4 came 7 years later. Krome tried keeping the Tasmanian tiger alive here and there with stuff like a Facebook Create Your Tasmanian Tiger OC game, but the largest Australian studio rapidly whittled down in 2010 due to game cancellations, work trickling in more and more slowly, all the stuff I mentioned a bit ago. Those at the studio that got laid off didn't seem surprised when those layoffs began, often pointing out the constant focus on contract work rather than original ideas, the low budgets and tight deadlines, some questionable management decisions including allegedly pouring far too much time and far too many resources into one of the manager's pet projects, a downloadable game named Blade Kitten, the fact that outsourcing to other countries got even cheaper than even Chrome's bottom dollar budgets, just a number of missteps that added up to be a really bad fall down the stairs. It's hard to paint the clearest picture even only a decade later, but this was a studio that was renowned for hiring the best and brightest in Australia's game development field, only to often use them on cheap ports and licensed projects. One former Krome employee said to IGN back in 2010, "Everyone gets into this industry because they want to make great games, not because they want to make the next great low-budget children's license. I understand that you have to pay the bills, but when that's all you're doing year after year, you begin to lose enthusiasm." Now that's not to say that all Krome was known for internally was crunch and soul-crushing licensed work. The culture was apparently positive even in these final years, even if the material they were working on wasn't. And those that were laid off also noted that Krome had gone out of its way to hire employees laid off from other studios or closures in prior years, finding some sort of job to give them. At the time, the company's CEO Robert Walsh noted that they would often keep an extra 40+ people on staff for a few weeks with no real project for them to work on after they finished up a game, as they waited for more contract work to come in. Contracts that often got pushed back a couple weeks, then a couple more, and before you know it, you've paid a few $100,000 to keep people sitting around for 2 months with nothing to do. With Australian game devs at the time not really having many places to go, it looks to me like the company took these contracts on just to not have to lay people off, that it accidentally ballooned from a few dozen people to over 300 just by giving everybody some kind of work rather than considering the kind of work that anybody wanted to do. When the options are to take crappy work to keep the band together, or lay people off and hope that you can be the 1 in a million that can land a publisher on a new IP in the sequel-heavy late 2000s, it's a tough choice. There's no real winner. Thankfully, this story doesn't just end on a bummer. The end result of this 2010 downturn was that after 3 concurrent projects happened to be cancelled at the exact same time, Krome dropped from 350+ employees back to that few dozen they had started with in 1999 to 2000. Once more, they continued taking bad contract work just to have any work, because to make any smaller passion project or lean fully into smartphone game development, you would end up having to lay off even more people. It's a gamble countless studios were forced to take around this time, and most of them didn't come back from it. That said, for some, it did pay off. You remember Fruit Ninja? That was developed by one of Krome's frequent partners in Australia, the very same studio that had made the Game Boy Advance versions of the first 3 Thai games. If you're wondering why I didn't look at those GBA Thai games, by the way, it's because I didn't want to. Some folks like to comment with the classic, "Oh, you forgot this." No, it was just that I know what GBA or DS versions usually look like for these sorts of game, and I'll let somebody else take the gamble on not wasting several hours of their life playing some quarter-budget 2D side-scroller in the hopes that the 5 people that rave about it online are correct that it's some kind of hidden gem. Anyway, back to the main series here, the real Thai games. In 2012, Krome released an iPhone target shooting game called Boomerang Blat. Oh. Okay, well, thankfully that was just them warming back up for Ty the Tasmanian Tiger 4 the following year. Ty 4 is a quarter-budget 2D side-scroller. Maybe I should have played the Game Boy games. Yeah, so it's never been outright stated, but it's been very much implied that Ty 4 only exists because Microsoft was bankrolling games at the time for Windows 8 and its tablet line, essentially the same thing they do now with Game Pass, where they just fund development completely, throw some money your way, you keep your share of the profits from any sales your game gets, and nobody asks any questions because, hey, Microsoft has $100 billion on hand at any given moment, they'd better be using it for something other than just Windows Phone. Seriously, you guys remember Windows Phone? I wanted one of those back then, thank God I was poor. Ty 4 was a bit on the controversial side when it first released, at least with the 1,000 or 2 fans that discussed the games online. Part of this is that this game released at the tail end of that era of 2D retro revivals of older franchises, games like Sonic 4 that hurt more than they helped scratch that itch that some fans had. In this case especially, a smartphone one of those with a cheap-looking flash animation style and swappable character reskins that cost $1.50 each but didn't quite reflect in the cutscenes, when many of these characters never actually existed in the series before. These were just brand new OCs or something to try and drive extra microtransaction sales or whatever. It didn't exactly invoke confidence. Another part of it was that Ty 4 originally released on Windows 8 without the 4 in the title, only adding that number in later once the remasters of the older Ty games started hitting PC. And a third part of it is that the game was only on the Windows 8 storefront for 2 years before hitting Steam, where thankfully those character swaps were made available exclusively using the in-game opals rather than microtransactions. The lack of a number in the original title especially led to that immediate knee-jerk, "Oh god, no, it's a reboot" fear, even though this game makes it abundantly clear at the start of the game that it takes place after 3, going so far as having Boss Cass flood the town of New Burramudgee that we saw in the 3rd game. It is a direct sequel. It features all your favorite characters from the old games, albeit not with voice acting yet until the new Switch version drops. It's got some of the same styles of missions that you'd see in the earlier games, but flattened and somehow packed into these 2D levels. Honestly, it's kind of a neat game. Not a great one, but a neat one. Each act of the game features 3 levels and a boss fight, with each level being sort of split into 3 sub-chapters, and all throughout the story is told by way of comic panel cutscenes. You've got a faithful recreation of pretty much everything in Ty, from your invisible boxes and platforms to the random little side quest helping folks out, the same 3 enemies this series has ever had, all the way down to the trademark boomerang chuck in action. Actually, no, that's not fair. This game feels like it has more enemy variety in just this one game alone than the first 3 games did combined. So, hey, that's one in Ty 4's favor. The level design can sometimes end up long in the tooth, with some missions that involve backtracking through parts of the level if you miss one of the required collectibles or enemies for that mission, and it doesn't quite work given this game's segmented 2D level design. It's usually not too bad, and the levels only take a few minutes each the vast majority of the time, but getting your bearings when several parts of the level look super similar, it isn't ideal. That said though, the best part about Ty 4 is that it uses the boomerangs once again more as a puzzle-solving ability than any of the Ty games except for one, so that's kinda cool. Ty 4 actually makes a good number of these sorts of small but very welcome changes, namely making it so that the bosses actually reset their health when you die instead of just picking up with the same exact amount of lowered health like they did in the prior 3 games. That was fine for 3's final boss, but it always kinda felt cheap elsewhere. Bosses and some glowing enemies also now have a pattern that requires the use of Ty's new special move, one where he just throws money at you. In the earlier games, you could charge up your bite attack and spend 100 opals to do a super bite, but that wasn't exactly economical compared to just spending 10 opals to fling them at your foes here. And honestly, this move just looks cooler to me. It has any purpose at all compared to the other games where most things were a one-shot kill anyway, and again, it just feels better. So, hey. At best and at worst, TIE 4 is forgettable. Even my usually detailed note-taking when I'm playing through these sorts of games amounted to almost nothing because it's a game that simply sort of exists, and honestly, that's fine. I don't need to have a detailed breakdown of this game to think, yeah, this is a valid entry. It's kinda cool seeing all the little things that the team either wanted to go back and fix from 3 or change in general. Like, this game just undoes 3's ending for one by reviving that character that sacrificed herself at the end of that game, but now as an evil robot, before apparently regenerating her entire body from the last bit of tail that hadn't been obliterated by the explosion in TIE 3 like she's fucking Perfect Cell or something, and then reappearing in that Boomerang Blast game afterwards. I don't know why that's a thing, but it is, so I guess that iPhone-exclusive target shooter is technically the sequel to this originally Windows-exclusive game. Enjoy that information. There's also a mission involving this giant whale that was just sitting in a lake in TIE 3 doing nothing. The whale is also named TIE apparently, and he's TIE's biggest fan and a TIE cosplayer. This is a strange series. Okay, one more before I move on. Boss Cass tries to fly a meteor into the planet in this game to get vengeance for his extinct dinosaur ancestors, and when that fails, he creates his own localized ice age by himself. This game is stupid, and that's pretty okay. TIE 4 is sort of what you'd want from this series at this point, another good excuse to revisit these neat characters and see what they're up to. Most importantly, it achieved its goal of making just enough money for Krome to start going back and remastering the first 3 games for PC in 2016, 2017, and 2018 by way of Steam Early Access. Given that these were still low-budget affairs, the remasters don't do anything super special really, outside of adding some fun bonus footage or TIE 2 adding something to do with those platinum cogs you collect, and TIE 3 cutting back on the Quinkin's high health bars. And for what it's worth, I don't think they needed to do anything special with these sorts of remasters, just clean them up, make them look a little bit prettier, fix some stuff, and as I've heard some Australians say in the past, maybe at least once, I swear I'm not making this up, Bob's your uncle. I mean, hell, there were a good number of lucky breaks that Krome ran into when they realized their old source file backups were completely lost. They ended up finding some of 1's level data accidentally left inside TIE 2's files. It never got deleted before TIE 2's master discs were printed, and they had to use some online help cracking into an old archive CD they stumbled onto when they couldn't remember a 15-year-old password. Rather than exhaustively rework the games and every single issue they may have had, the goal was to look at what players' nostalgia would be and base changes off of what your brain would do to smooth the edges of an older game. You know, your improved lighting and shadows, obviously a frame rate bump, minor gameplay tweaks not even die-hard fans seem to have noticed, since usually somebody puts together a master list of changes on a wiki or a long Reddit complaint post about how the game is ruined or something. There's nothing here. What's most impressive about this remaster era of TIE is the slow snowball effect that seems to have taken place, and how the timing worked out pretty much perfectly for Krome Studios. From 2015 through 2018, Steam players got all 4 TIE games, one after the other with steady consistency, with the team taking constant feedback from the players that were there from the jump and launching right at the very peak of this platformer renaissance we found ourselves in. Even if the volume of Steam reviews is on the smaller side, the games, according to Krome, were some of the most highly rated on Steam when each one dropped. Then, once they got all the games on PC by 2019, they opened a small Kickstarter to help cover the more time-consuming and sometimes expensive process of getting TIE 1 certified for all 3 consoles. And even the 2,500 backers they got blew that modest $50,000 goal out of the water. The same happened for TIE 2 the following year, after the first game launched on consoles right on the promised Kickstarter schedule, which is unheard of for Kickstarter, and the games even got a PC update to include all of the new adjustments from that Kickstarter. Surprisingly, 2 got even more Kickstarter support, which caught me off guard when I found that out, since 1 seems to be pretty unanimously considered the best and most successful game in the series. It's just really cool seeing grassroots support directly revive a franchise. Well, except for 3. They leapfrogged right over putting 3 on console because it seems like they know it'd both take much more time and money to fix everything that game's got going on. I mean, the PC port can only cover so much of the surface, and also that no matter what, that game would probably bomb once again, so it's kind of a sad casualty. You may wonder what the future is for this Tasmanian tiger, given that it's in this new golden age of sorts, and those Kickstarters give a bit of an idea. Part of the backer rewards included a new comic that directly sets up wherever they're looking to go with a 5th game, and although they haven't said outright that TIE 5 is on the way, it feels like, barring disaster, it's a matter of time. I found during my research that some folks from the development team at Krome are very active on places like the TIE subreddit, frequently talking about the development of the games, different changes that were made, all the same sort of stuff that they had made sure to include in the remasters as fun bonus content, and they've mused that a hypothetical 5th game would almost certainly go back to 1's pure collectathon roots so that they can bring all the ideas to the table that they've been simmering on for years now. There's never been a better time than now for that kind of game, and again, that's really cool to see. When you think about the graveyard of platformer mascots that were around in the late 90s or the mid 2000s, unless you were made by Nintendo or your name is Clank, odds are you didn't make it out. If you were lucky, your former creators got the band back together at a new studio and gave you a little step-sibling that usually didn't live up to the impossible legacy that you'd set years or decades prior. If you weren't so lucky, you probably got shelved after going through the same exact kind of tumultuous life that Ty did, or you got replaced by reboot after reboot after reboot until there was no DNA left from the original, nothing left to care about. So even if I've got a lot to critique about the games themselves at times, for something like Ty to first crawl, then walk, and eventually leap out of a shallow grave, I don't know, I just find that admirable. I still think that Ty's probably in a bit of a precarious spot, with games that are selling well enough to get by, but I'm guessing not really blowing off the roof. Games that are mostly reaching their original audience, outside of folks that buy the game on cheap Steam sales, or folks like me that finally gave the games a shot out of curiosity or word of mouth. But that's also why I wanted to explore these underdog games and their history here today, because this revival could not happen without both designers and players that were so enamored with this charming little series. There had to be something down under the surface that kept this of all platformers so firmly in people's minds and hearts. And when I played them, yeah, I could see it, and hopefully me sharing Ty and Krome's story with you, hopefully some of the stories and memories that I know some of you will be sharing in the comments can help drive a few more folks to give this franchise a shot. I mean, how often do you get to see a species like the Tasmanian tiger come back from extinction? We can't just let that one slip by again. Thanks for watching, and until next time, stay golden. This video is brought to you in part by my wonderful crew of Patreon supporters here. If you'd like access to the Golden Colt Discord server, early and ad-free videos, exclusive Q&As, and much more, including seeing your name on this fancy list, it's only $1 a month over at patreon.com/thegoldenbolt. Special thanks to Goldstorm07, Cloudy Boy, Cranky, Jumprock, Karigane564, Malcavio, Mason Hunt, Philly D360, Phyrexian Sleeper Agent, Rodney220, the FOE3, The Critic of Innocence, Thomas Kuzma, Arlen B, Captain Squid, Chef Kilo, The Crazy Even, Damien W, Eclipse 2025, Epo90, Harry, HCSP1, Hotzi, I Pay My Cam Girl So Why Not You, Ibathon, James Boss, Justin Gregoire, famous Twitch streamer JTart9, Lupine Pariah, Maxi89C, The Milkman, Moises, Patrick Jackson, Rye, Shadow Nexa, Stefan, Smoothies, Terminally Nerdy, Wayne is Boss, WDog999, William Bundy, and Buckles Chucklow. Thank you.